Hello everyone. In this presentation, a new view of recent history leading to the second coming, I want to explain that the last 400 years, I want to explain there's been a struggle, intense struggle of ideas leading up to two worldviews. Also want to explain about the internal meaning of the world wars that happened already at this time, and also leading to the two worldviews. Also the coming of the Antichrist and the true Christ. But first of all, the last 400 years has really been an intense struggle between God and Satan, and the place where this battle took place is in the minds and hearts of humanity. We've seen incredible struggle that's leading to two very different worldviews. But first of all, we need to understand this, we need to go back to the 400 years of preparation for the coming of Jesus, the first coming. And we see in this time the original, due to the fall of humanity, the original nature of humanity was not free. So two kinds of movements came about to liberate people's nature, original nature. The original nature is the able type. We call it more internal. This stresses religion, faith, duty and piety. But the movement to bring this about, of course, was the Hebraism and the religion of ancient Israel. They were prepared to receive Jesus. But that was prepared in an external environment, which is equally important. We call this the Cain type because it's more external. They emphasize more science, reason, rights and individualism. And this Hellenism came about. Well, Hellenism at that time, of course, is an ancient world, but nevertheless, in preparation for Jesus, it brought about, the Roman Empire was part of that, the straight roads that enabled ease of transportation. The Greek language, the Greek culture played a very important part. It enabled ease of communication at that time. But the two together, if they combined, would have eased the mission of Jesus at that time. He would have been able to reach the world in a relatively short period of time. But unfortunately, of course, Jesus was killed, and then a second coming became necessary. So of course, in the last 400 years of the preparation for the second coming of the Christ, two developments, two main movements came about to restore that circumstance to receive the Messiah. Well, to restore Hebraism, at the time of the Reformation. The Reformation came about to restore man's individual freedom to worship God. And the Renaissance was more external. This came about to enable the free development of ideas. People like Galileo and struggled very much to develop the scientific ideas that they had at the time. So both were necessary. So in this presentation there's three main periods from the Reformation time up until the Treaty of Westphalia, and then from the Treaty of Westphalia to the French Revolution, with the struggle of the Enlightenment and Awakenings, and then from the French Revolution up to the end of the First World War. But first of all, we look at the church before the Reformation became corrupted and sold in indulgences, meaning people could pay for their sins to be forgiven. The reason for this is because why this is possible, because the church at that time had supreme power. There's no other churches. In fact, the church made the situation so that other churches could not exist. And the Bible was always written in the Latin language. And so the everyday person on the street could not read the Bible himself. Only the richer or educated classes could read it, which were very few. And of course, people had to rely on the interpretation of the church. And the theory for this, how they justify this, where an interpretation they gave of Matthew 16:19, where Jesus said to Peter, "I'll give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you lose on earth will be lost in heaven." Well, their understanding at the time was the Pope was a successor of Peter, and he had the right to send people to heaven or hell. He could forgive sins. And so, a theory they developed, the theory of purgatory. This means that a person on earth, he can only go to heaven if he's free of all sins. If not, they go to purgatory, which is a place of suffering. But the Pope was selling indulgences with pieces of paper people could buy, and depending on the amount they bought, depending on the amount of sins can be forgiven, and thus have less time in purgatory. Well, Martin Luther at that time, of course many others before him, stood against this, but they were severely persecuted, often killed. But Martin Luther was the first person to stand against the church successfully, with the help of the printing press that was established at that time. And this was the reason for the Reformation. And so the Reformation, we see the original nature put in this diagram as two natures: external, the Renaissance, that stream, and the internal, Hebel stream, Reformation onwards. Luther started Reformation. Calvin brought the Reformation to France, Zwingli to Switzerland. Wycliffe was a person in England before all this. He translated the Bible into English, but he was killed, or his Bibles were burned. Now, in the Cain type development, the external, the Enlightenment came about. Now, I want to explain to you about these philosophers. I'm not going to say they're not all bad. In fact, they're good people. And many of them believed in God. Descartes believed in God, I know, and some others did. But the ideas they developed, how they're used afterwards, this is important. We'll look at these one by one: Descartes, Bacon, Herbert, Strauss, Feuerbach, Darwin, Freud and Marx. First of all, Descartes developed rationalism. Now, rationalism is good. We can understand the truth through logical reasoning. In fact, this is very useful in theology. I think we can understand things. But if you only depend on rationalism, of course, rationalism can't lead to all truth. You can't understand love through reason. And of course, the spiritual experience, it can't logically be proven. And so if the danger was to depend too much on rational thinking. Empiricism, or Francis Bacon, is more the experimental method. You can know a truth if you can experiment and repeat the experience. Now, this would work perfectly well if you were making cakes. You put a certain amount of ingredients together and it will make a certain result, and it will work each time. But this again is a very external view of truth. This of course would discount spiritual experiences, that you can't repeat at will a spiritual experience. If you had a person had an experience of love, you can't repeat that at will, but his experience is very real. And obviously an experience of God cannot be repeated at will, although of course it can be ongoing, depending on a person's faith. But you can't repeat it at will. Edward Herbert developed the idea of deism. Now, deism is a belief in a God, but this God is a God who created the world, but left it, abandoned it, just like a machine. This is the first stage, I believe, toward atheism, because it's not a belief in a personal God. Ludwig Feuerbach, he wrote the book The Essence of Christianity. But in this, his idea is that God is simply a projection of human personality. It's just people's projection of their nature, but there's no real God. And then D.F. Strauss wrote The Life of Jesus. In this, sounds a nice title, but really in this book is very much against Jesus. He's discrediting the miracles of Jesus as just fabrications by the earlier followers. So these people, although they're many of them good in some way, but their ideas can be used to take people's minds away from God. Was it Charles Darwin? Now Charles Darwin, he brought the wrong view of humanity, wrong view of human being. Now this is an assault on the first blessing of Genesis 1:28, of individual perfection, being fruitful. His view of evolution, that we just simply a development from apes, evolution, of course people hold views on both sides. Even many theologians or Christian people believe in evolution. That doesn't discount God. But the problem was how it's been used at the time. It made God, in the minds of many people, to be redundant. So this brought the wrong view of human beings. So of course, if a person thinks he's nothing more than the descendant of a monkey, an animal, then there's not much reason to keep any standards of ethics or morality. Sigmund Freud, he brought a wrong view of human problems. And of course, this is an assault on the second blessing, being fruitful and multiply. In Genesis 1:28, multiply means after reaching perfection, realize an ideal marriage, ideal family, centered on God. His wrong view of human problems, he held the view that all of human problems are the result of repressed sexual desires. So if you believe your problems are just a result of repressed sexual desires, what's the solution? Just to liberate your sexual desires? So of course, many people held his views and thought, then just practice free sex and you'll have a healthy mental life. But there's no psychiatrist today who would hold that view, even if they happen to be atheists. If you just liberate your practice free sex all the time, you're more likely to have more mental problems. So this is a wrong view of human problems. Now Karl Marx, he got the wrong view of material. Now, of course, this is like an assault on the third blessing of Genesis 1:28, to have dominion over the creation. But that dominion over the creation is like centered on God. Karl Marx believed that he's a strong materialist. There's only matter. So human value was nothing more than material. So therefore his theory is like the Labour theory of value. Human value was only according to how much he worked. Of course, this led to the communist world. Now, in the more internal, the able type development, we had the awakenings. And these people, they brought man's mind closer to God and spiritual experience. Now, John Wesley, Philip Spener, George Fox, and Emanuel Swedenborg. Of course, there are many more than this. We just selected a few as representative. Well, look, first of all, John Wesley in England established the Methodist movement. At that time, he travelled around the country in horseback delivering sermons, but he always reached out to the poorer people. We could say he was the first missionary in a way. He was the first one to think the church should care about more unfortunate people. He received a lot of persecution in his day, but he brought Christianity to a higher state of consciousness and to think more of others. Philip Spener in Germany established the Pietists, a very similar movement emphasizing mystical experience. George Fox established the Quakers. In his thinking that the church prior to George Fox, only the minister, God could only work through the minister. But George Fox held strongly to the view that every person can be a channel of God. Every person can be a minister. So in Quaker services they didn't have a pulpit, they'd have a circle where people, any person who felt inspired could speak the word of God. Emanuel Swedenborg, originally a scientist in Sweden, but his spiritual senses opened. He realized that the afterlife is a spiritual world, and it's possible to have spiritual experiences on earth. And he wrote the book Heaven and Hell, which is a description of the spiritual world. Now these developments went on up until the French Revolution. There was two revolutions, in fact. There was the French Revolution. Well, first was the American Revolution, but this is a revolution against to gain religious freedom, the Puritan Revolution. This led to an able-type democracy. Now the French Revolution, we call this a Cain-type one because those who organised it, they were very anti-religious. They saw that the church was an ally of the oppressive government, and so they killed many priests in the process of that. But the result, they had Cain-type democracy. So if you compare the French Constitution from that and the American Constitution from that revolution, they're quite different. Now we say from this development, the Cain-type development, Cain-type democracy, communism appeared on the earth. Now communism is a worldview where there's no God. Communism took over half the world one stage, or even more than half. There's a worldview where it's a world without God. In the Bible it says the Antichrist will come first, set up his kingdom, then that kingdom will collapse, and then the true Christ will come after that. Well, that's already happened. Communism has appeared on the earth. It lasted for over 40 years, and it collapsed. Now we can expect the true Messiah to come with, to realize the kingdom of heaven on earth. But we'll come into that a bit later. First of all, let's read this passage, Matthew 25, 31 and 33. This is where Jesus is describing the last days, and then the sheep will be separated from the goats. What's that mean, the sheep will be separated from the goats? What's the difference between a sheep and a goat? They look the same, but if you look more closely, examine in nature, a sheep always follows the shepherd. Who does the goat follow? No one. And that's the symbology that Jesus used to show that the shepherd symbolizes God in the Bible. So the believers and the non-believers set up a world, and which was communism. But the real believers will realize the ideal world later. Reverend Samyang Moon states, in exposition of the divine principle, that the paths of religion, politics and economy to converge and realize God's ideal, a new expression of truth must emerge which can completely integrate religion and science. The religion founded upon this truth will lead all of humanity to become one with God in heart. Such people will build an economy in accordance with the divine ideal. These will be the foundations for a new political order which can realize the ideal of creation. This will be the Messianic kingdom built on the principles of interdependence, mutual prosperity and universally shared values. Now it's important to understand what's happening here. So we've gone through a long course of history since the time of the fall of Adam and Eve. Now, because Adam and Eve fell, they failed to realize the world God intended. In fact, they realized the world more that Satan intended. That's why in we find biblical verses that says Satan is the god of this world, and so on. But let's think, if Adam and Eve did not fall, what kind of family would it have been? In the family, is there democracy there? No, the parents, in ordinary families, no democracy. There's the parents. They're naturally in that position. But because they fell, people multiplied. We've had a history of kings and emperors, but fallen people, that doesn't work very well. If the emperor or the king is an evil person, the people tend to suffer. So it hasn't worked. So therefore we needed to break down society, to bring democracy, so we can choose who's going to lead us. And so we've had the first one, as we've seen, the Cain-type democracy. This led to communism. Communism is a monarchic society, really, with there's a ruler over them. But the idea they have in communism, the dictator of the proletariat, is like an ideal man. But the question is he? This is like an imitation of the ideal world God intends to realize in the future. Let's look. In the Abel-type democracy, what should come out of this is a world waiting for the real Messiah to come. When the real Messiah comes, of course, he is a perfect man, so he can be trusted. So he should rightfully become the true king. And so in history, we've had three main developments in a monarchic development. Steam energy. It's always corresponding power. Democracy, electricity. And now we're leading into the kingdom of heaven. In the kingdom of heaven, the next industrial revolution, if you like to call it that, is the atomic one. But of course we're not yet in the ideal world, on the verge of it, so it's unsafe to use atomic energy. People use it for weapons of destruction. And so when the ideal comes, when it's safe to do so, atomic energy can be used, and this will really bring about an ideal world physically on the earth. And this will be great news because we can end poverty. It can really bring the world closer together, end poverty, and fulfill all the energy needs in the world at a very short cost. Now the ideal society is based on the ideal person. If you think of a healthy person, the brain directs the spine, through the nervous system, through the organs and cells, and the heart, lungs and stomach. Now, in ideal society, God, both through the Messiah, through the saints, organizations, people, through the executive, legislative and judiciary. Now that's the ideal society. Of course, in a sick individual, it doesn't work. And the world today is like a sick individual. That's why there's a lot of competition, unfair distribution and so on. But in the future, when the Messiah comes, it can be established in a way that all humanity can literally live in the kingdom of heaven on the earth. I want to explain now about world wars. World wars is not what God wants, of course. God doesn't plan to have wars. But they have an internal meaning. It's only Satan that wants wars. But first of all, again, we have to go through back to the 400 years of preparation for the first coming of Messiah, of Jesus. In this time, John the Baptist was in a position as the central person to lead the people to Messiah, to lay the foundation for that. But through the failure of John the Baptist, then Jesus had to take up that position as John the Baptist and lead people to himself. And so it enabled Satan to confront Jesus 3 times in the 3 temptations. Now in the last 400 years, leading up to the second coming, the wasn't the position of John the Baptist or the Christian nations, because this is the world level. Now if the Christian nations lay bad conditions, then this will enable Satan to confront the world with in the form of three temptations, or they become 3 world wars. So we'll look at this more closely in a moment. The bad conditions where the Christian nations practiced slavery, and also in the industrial age, children as young as 5 years were working in factories. So these bad conditions Satan could use in the last days to bring about 3 attempts to destroy the world. So first of all, we need to look to understand how Satan works in history. It would be good to look at how God works in history first. What is God's purpose in history? Well, first of all, God leaves a foundation of faith, a foundation of substance, unity based on that faith, and then this is the foundation to receive the Messiah. The Messiah will come with God's words to realize God's kingdom. This is simply what God plans to realize, God's purpose in history. So what is Satan's purpose in history is a direct opposite, is to destroy, make a foundation to destroy faith in God, and then foundation to destroy unity, and this is a foundation to send the Antichrist. The Antichrist will come with Satan's words to realize Satan's kingdom. And so we'll see how this plays out. First of all, we needed to consider the meaning of the Antichrist. Well, the main part of the Bible where it speaks about the Antichrist is in Revelation 13. So we'll look at the main section of Revelation 13. We'll analyze this a bit more closely. Because many people think that the Antichrist is a person coming who's going to pretend to be like Jesus and then lead everyone astray, and then people will realize they've been deceived and it's too late. But let's look at this directly from Revelation to see what it really means. So first of all, read this. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea. On its heads were blasphemous names. Its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And the dragon gave it his power and his throne and great authority. The whole earth followed the beast. They worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. If we consider this, first of all, the first point I want to emphasize, this utters blasphemous names. Blasphemous names is like cursing. This being whatever it is speaking words against God. Then, who's like the beast? Who can fight against it? This is clearly a person making war, a military ruler. And the person is, again, opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And also is allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. Does this sound like a person pretending to be like Jesus? Clearly not. This Antichrist, as the word stands, a person against Christ or against God. And so this person is obviously a person who is an atheist type leader, a person who wants to wipe out religion. What do you think then? Who is it more likely? Would it be likely to be someone like Jesus of Nazareth, or someone more similar to Adolf Hitler? It speaks for itself. Now, we have to look. Satan, at the beginning, realized the fallen world through three beings, the archangel, Eve and Adam. So in the last days, God works on a world level and will realize the ideal world through three nations. So this means that Satan will try to realize his world through three nations. So we'll come back to this in a moment. But the internal causes of the world wars are Satan's last struggle to hold on to power, hold on to the world, to restore the three blessings that God gave to Adam and Eve at the beginning, restore the three temptations of Jesus, and that's a worldwide Cain-Abel conflict. So first of all, look at World War I. Now these nations, I want to emphasize at the beginning, there's some nations on the Abel or God's side and some nation of Cain, Satan's side. It doesn't mean they're all good or bad, or they're all good or bad. Of course people are mixed. It just means behind the scenes Satan is using those nations for their own purposes. Now first of all, these nations, Germany, Austria, Hungary and Turkey, they're on the Cain side, on Satan's side, for the simple reason that the position they took was more in line with Satan's direction. And at that time, Turkey, a Muslim nation, destroyed many Armenian Christians. They committed an atrocity there. Germany and Austria and Hungary supported them. They were allies. So also I mentioned that the three world wars are like three temptations. Well, they are in a way, because these nations, this is a time of monarchs ruled the world. It was a time of people competing for colonies. Now these side, the Cain side, they want to share the world. It's like a temptation. But the Allied side, Russia, first of all, Britain and France, they resisted. They didn't want to go that far. They want to keep their standards. So it become a world war. It could have been if the Abel side resisted more early, they could have prevented the war. But they unfortunately didn't. So war became inevitable. There was still Russia on this side, but they were replaced by the United States, because Russia became the first communist nation in 1917, so they pulled out of the war. Now, God will try to realize the world through the first Adam. He fell, Jesus was crucified. It will be completed with the second coming of Christ. So Satan will have three central persons in those positions: a satanic Adam, satanic Jesus, and a satanic second coming of Christ. So here, the satanic Adam was Kaiser Wilhelm II. His ideology was pan-Germanism. His goal was world dominion. Second World War, this happened. Germany, Japan and Italy in those positions. The reason is Italy, they invaded Ethiopia, they killed many people. Japan, they invaded Manchuria, parts of China and Korea, and killed many Christians. And Germany invaded Poland. Now these nations, as I said earlier, the war could have been prevented, but the rest of the world didn't turn a blind eye often to these atrocities. And so it became to the point where a war became inevitable. There was a temptation, in a way, that these nations were tempted with fascism. They could just share the world, share the colonies and so on. But the Allied side, United States, Britain and France, resisted this and went to war. Now the satanic Jesus at this time was Adolf Hitler. His ideology was National Socialism. His goal, again, was world dominion. Now Adolf Hitler, being the satanic Jesus, there are many similarities with Jesus. Jesus was a great orator, great speaker. Also he many attempts at his life, but Jesus always went through the crowd and escaped being killed. Likewise, Hitler was a great orator, a great speaker, and many attempts in his life, but he always managed to escape. Like the spiritual world or the evil spiritual world always managed to protect him. And both were single individuals, single idealists. And now the Third World War, this may surprise you, but this was the Korean War between 1950 and 1953. And so the satanic second coming of Christ was Joseph Stalin. His ideology was communism. His goal was world dominion. And so his goal was being communism. It's a world without God, a direct opposite of what God would plan in the kingdom of heaven, a world centered on God. The Korean War, it's important to analyze this. It is quite a short time after the Second World War. The communists invaded Korea and took over all of Korea. Douglas MacArthur landed his troops in the famous Incheon landing, and he pushed all the communists to the borders of China. And he wanted, in his mind, this was a Third World War. Now, President Truman, being influenced by other nations like Britain and France and many people in the United States who felt, what's going on here? We don't want another war. I think Britain, with their kind of self-interest with their colony of Hong Kong, and France with Vietnam, they're worried about their colonies. So they put a lot of pressure on Truman, and Truman put a lot of pressure on Douglas MacArthur. He said, no, we don't continue this war. So there's a conflict between the two men. But eventually, President Truman fired Douglas MacArthur and installed another Governor General. But as soon as this happened, the communists came back and took over half of Korea up to the 38th parallel. So this is a very serious failure. Douglas MacArthur's mind, this is the Third World War began. He should just complete the job. Well, because of this, MacArthur fired another Governor General installed. Of course, the communists, they say, well, this is a weakness, there's confusion or in the Allied side. So they just came back and took over half of Korea. And so this third attempt, this should have been a world war, became extended, prolonged. Just like the Israelites, when they failed in the wilderness, they had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years as a period of separation from Satan. Likewise, the world had to go through a 40 years separation from Satan through the Cold War period. But first of all, if what should have happened, that Third World War that Satan started, should have ended by that time, and then within about 7 years, the Messiah would be able to complete his mission, and the kingdom of heaven would have been realized any time after, say, 1960. But unfortunately, because their failure, then the Cold War, like Satan gained another 40 years. So this takes us up to 1993, and say any time after that, another 7 years, not 2000, but any time after 2000, up to the kingdom of heaven should be realized on the earth. But first of all, let's note, let's look again at the three very briefly. The First World War, the Messiah is due to be born between 1917 and 1930. The First World War enabled the Messiah to be born on the earth, symbolizing the first blessing. World War II, that enabled the Messiah to begin his public ministry. World War III should lay the basis for the Messiah to complete his mission, which is the kingdom of heaven on the earth. Because of this prolongation, it went on to 1993 and then in the 2000 period. And so we might think, well, where is the kingdom of heaven? Where is it then? So we have to really think clearly what would have happened if, at the very beginning, if Adam and Eve obeyed God. If they would have obeyed God, they would have realized the kingdom of heaven in their family. They would have expanded that to society, which would have resembled the family, a kingdom of heaven in the society, the clan, the nation, and eventually the world would have been the kingdom of heaven. And so it's important to understand or know where to look. You know, Jesus said once in Luke 17:22, "You will long to see the day of the Son of Man, but you will not see it." Why did he say that? Because if you're looking for the wrong thing, you won't find the right thing. If we're confused by looking for external signs or miracles or dramatic events, we may miss the important day. And the Messiah can be on earth and realize the ideal family and realize the ideal society, ideal nation. It may not be seen by those who are not looking. So the Messiah can be on earth at the moment, so we need to open our eyes and see. This incredible news, and I really encourage you to study more of the divine principle, as Reverend Samuel Moon's words. And thank you very much.